So welcome everyone. Uh, I let the latecomers just sitting in. Welcome everyone here and online to this very interesting panel. We are one of the first sessions of the AHF when our minds are fresh, are ready, they're sharp, everything seems possible, right? My name is Fanny Petitbon. I work for Care France, based in Paris. And I just want to start by saying that I was very pleased when I was offered to moderate this panel, because this panel is about accountability. And I think we spend a lot of time, the community in general, the humanitarian community, trying to design the perfect deliverables, the perfect pledges, initiatives, but quite often we're not as good as, in the walk the talk phase. But today this is exactly what we're going to do. We're going to look at the progress made, but also the challenges faced in the implementation of two key documents on greening humanitarian aid and better integrating climate and environmental risks in humanitarian action. Of course, the first document I refer to is the Climate and Environment Charter that was led by the IFRC and the ICRC and launched in May 2021. This document contains 7 commitments that now more than 350 humanitarian organizations from local CSOs to big INGOs have signed. And 10 countries plus the EU have also become official supporters. And the other key document is the Humanitarian Donors Declaration on Climate and Environment, which actually it's celebrating its birthday here, because it was launched a year ago at the first EHF. It was put on the table by the French government and the EU, and has been now signed by 24 countries plus the EU. And it's kind of the donor equivalent of the Climate and Environment Charter. So the objective of today's session is twofold. The first one is to follow up on the commitments that were made last year on greening humanitarian aid and better adapting humanitarian response to climate and environmental risks. And the second one is to discuss how we bridge the divide, how we respond to the needs of humanitarian NGOs, partners all across the globe, which really want actually to be better, to improve their humanitarian response, but lack the support, whether technical expertise, financial support. So we'll be talking about that today. And I wanted to say that for me, today is actually a special day, and I think you all know it. No, it's not my birthday. But I think it's important that this discussion is happening today, because today, as most of you know, and I hope you know, it's going to be the release this afternoon, the official release of the synthesis of the 6th IPCC assessment report on climate change. And even though, of course, it's still embargoed, we know what's in this report. It's saying that climate change is not going anywhere. Climate impacts are going to accelerate, they're going to intensify, and we know that the 1.5 limitation of temperature is still within reach, that we have solutions at hand, but what we clearly lack is political will. So today, it's about how we work to advocate for this political will, how we integrate that also in our work as humanitarian actors. And to speak about all that, we have a great panel with very diverse, a wide range of views today. We will have Julia Stewart-David, Acting Director for Disaster Preparedness and Prevention for DG ECHO. Stéphane Romatet, Director of the Crisis Center from the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as Ignacio Packer, Executive Director of IGVA, Fie Lauritsen, Senior Advisor at Dan Church Aid and Voice Board Member, Azmat Khan. Thank you, Azmat, CEO of the Foundation for Rural Development, who came all the way from Pakistan. Susanne Fries-Geyer, Director for Humanitarian Assistance from the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Petr Gandalovic, Director for Development, Cooperation and Humanitarian Assistance at the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Some just housekeeping rules, so no Beyoncé ringtone hear either, as you heard in the first session, so please put your phones on silent mode. You have the hashtag of the session. We have also Wi-Fi, sorry. I hope they will come up on the screen. Wi-Fi was not super well working this morning, but I hope it will get better. And also, we wanted to make sure that you use Slido. So if you can just go back to the previous slide. And so you go to the website or you scan the QR code. The idea is that you ask questions to the panelists on Slido all along the sessions, okay? Everything that comes to your minds. And closer to the end of the session, we will be asking you to vote for your preferred question. And it is the 1 or 2 or 3 questions that come on top that will be asked to the panelists. So I will stop there because I've been speaking way too much, but that is very French. And now we'll ask Mr. Romatet to come and give his keynote address. Thank you.
Thank you, Fanny. Thank you very much, Fanny. As we have the chance having a translation, and by instruction of my government, I will have to shift to French. D'abord, merci beaucoup, Fanny, d'avoir présenté notre débat d'aujourd'hui. Pour ce jour, évidemment, très important, puisque nous attendons effectivement les conclusions du nouveau rapport du GIEC attendu pour cet après-midi, et qui confirmeront évidemment l'urgence d'agir et l'impact que ça va avoir aussi, bien entendu, sur le débat d'aujourd'hui. Fanny, vous l'avez rappelé, c'était lors du premier forum humanitaire européen l'année dernière à Bruxelles. Nous avions effectivement, avec la Commission, la présidence française de l'époque, avait pris cette initiative de proposer une déclaration des bailleurs sur l'action climatique et l'aide humanitaire. Et nous sommes heureux, une année après cette déclaration, qu'effectivement 24 États membres de l'Union européenne et la Commission se soient joints à cette déclaration. Nous attendons encore 3 États membres qui, je l'espère, pourront bientôt se joindre à cette déclaration. Je crois que ce qui va être important dans le rapport du GIEC cet après-midi, dans sa publicité, c'est de montrer tout simplement qu'il faut nous attendre dans les mois qui viennent, comme nous l'avons vécu au cours des mois précédents, à une intensification des crises humanitaires d'origine climatique. Et lorsque nous regardons les interventions que les différents gouvernements ont dû mettre en place au cours des mois précédents, qu'il s'agisse du Mozambique, qu'il s'agisse très récemment du Vanuatu, qu'il s'agisse du Pakistan, qu'il s'agisse aussi, ça a été évoqué par le ministre allemand tout à l'heure, de la coopération du Tchad, des inondations au Tchad, etc. Nous voyons bien que nous sommes confrontés à une accélération, à une aggravation, à une intensification des crises humanitaires qui sont très clairement d'origine climatique. Et ceci, évidemment, pour les agences gouvernementales que nous représentons ici, pour les ONG, pour les institutions internationales, ceci nous oblige dans les voies d'action qui sont les nôtres. Je crois que ce qui est très important pour les donateurs, très important pour les ONG, c'est effectivement d'agir pour intégrer dans nos modes d'action cette dimension climatique. Nous pouvons le faire de plusieurs façons. Et effectivement, cette déclaration a fixé un certain nombre d'orientations. D'abord, l'anticipation. C'est une question clé. Comment peut-on effectivement agir par anticipation pour essayer de prévenir autant que se peut les conséquences des crises humanitaires d'origine climatique. Deuxièmement, la rapidité de la réponse humanitaire. Je crois qu'effectivement, ces crises climatiques, dont nous savons qu'elles vont se multiplier dans les années qui viennent, nous obligent à être encore plus réactifs. Et il y a effectivement, avec les ONG, des pistes sur lesquelles nous travaillons, ne serait-ce qu'en termes de prépositionnement de stock, en termes d'alerte précoce, un certain nombre de dispositifs qu'il faut mettre en place pour être capable, grâce précisément à ces mécanismes d'alerte précoce, de pouvoir réagir encore plus rapidement. J'ajoute aussi, et c'est pour les donateurs que nous représentons ici, certains d'entre nous dans ce panel, une action de plus en plus importante que nous menons, c'est le dialogue avec les ONG pour que les ONG, d'une certaine manière aussi, dans leur mode d'opération, comment dirais-je, face de l'impact de leurs actions sur le changement climatique, une donnée absolument essentielle dans les actions qu'elles mènent. Et en France, au centre de crise, effectivement, nous intégrons dans les conventions de financement que nous passons avec les ONG l'impact climatique de leurs interventions. Et les ONG nous font part d'un certain nombre de pratiques qu'elles mettent en place et qui permettent effectivement de réduire en quelque sorte l'impact environnemental des opérations qu'elles mènent sur le plan humanitaire. Voilà, donc c'est toutes ces actions sur lesquelles il faut intensifier nos efforts, l'anticipation, la réponse encore plus réactive aux crises, l'impact environnemental des actions qui sont menées sur le terrain, sur le plan humanitaire, sur lesquelles nous avons besoin d'une mobilisation des donateurs, des ONG. Cette déclaration que nous avons signée l'an dernier fournit un cadre. Elle complète d'autres déclarations. Vous avez évoqué aussi, Fanny, les initiatives qui ont été prises en particulier par la Croix-Rouge. Tout ceci forme un ensemble. Mais nous savons une chose, en effet, c'est que dans les années qui viennent, nous aurons à nous préparer à des événements humanitaires d'encore plus grande ampleur, d'origine climatique, et sur lesquels nous aurons besoin d'une mobilisation collective. Voilà, vous m'avez donné 5 minutes, et les 5 minutes sont épuisées à la seconde près. Merci à vous tous.
Thank you, Stéphane. Maybe just before you leave the stage and maybe this year France will be revising its humanitarian strategy. So
Right,
maybe you could
right.
give us in 1 minute just an idea, a hint on how climate and environment will be integrated in the strategy. Right?
Effectivement, cette année, nous allons organiser une conférence nationale humanitaire hein, qui sera ouverte par le président de la République, par le président Macron, qui nous permettra d'orienter nos financements humanitaires, nous l'espérons évidemment, à la hausse dans les années qui viennent. Et cette conférence nationale humanitaire que nous tiendrons à l'automne adoptera également la stratégie nationale humanitaire de la République française. Et dans cette stratégie nationale, nous travaillons à un contenu qui sera, nous l'espérons, aussi substantiel que possible sur cette dimension effectivement climatique de l'action humanitaire que la France doit mener et qui déclinera de manière très opérationnelle tous les éléments que je vous ai donnés, le Early Warning System, comme on dit en bon français, la capacité de réaction, le prépositionnement des stocks pour être au plus près des crises là où elles surviennent et qui nous permettent d'agir encore plus rapidement, et là aussi le dialogue que nous menons avec les ONG pour que elles et nous aussi, que nous verdissions en quelque sorte les actions humanitaires que nous menons. C'est ça, effectivement, le contenu climatique en quelque sorte de cette stratégie nationale humanitaire à laquelle nous sommes en train de travailler en lien avec les organisations non gouvernementales.
Thank you, Stéphane. Thank you
you.
very much. And now we'll kindly ask Julia to come and talk about actually a very interesting progress report. Now, you may have seen if you went onto the ECHO website Friday night, which I'm sure what you do on Friday nights, show the first progress report from the signatories of the declaration, but also a mapping exercise that ECHO has funded. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you very much, Fanny. And thank you all for turning up this morning. It's great to see so many of you here and online. Thank you, Stéphane. My challenge, I think, is to explain how we are walking the talk. I hope the interpreters get that. And as you all know, a 1-year-old sometimes has a little bit of trouble walking, but has baby steps. And I think that might set me up well for what I have to say. So we heard, and we all know it, that the world is already being very highly affected by climate change, environmental degradation, biodiversity loss. And we're seeing that this is contributing to the increasing humanitarian needs worldwide. So our donor declaration, we see, is sending a very clear message of commitment. However, as our partners will want us to say, what are we doing as a result of this donor declaration? Well, 1 year on, as Fanny said, we have come to you with a report, the first steps, on the impact of the declaration. We heard that France is already looking at its strategy. And we have 16 donor countries inputting to that report. As Fanny said, it's available already online. I hope we'll get the website up at some point. I don't expect many of you have read it from Friday night until now, but I do hope that many of you will go away from this session and have a look in more detail. So, short version, the progress is satisfactory. We are happy with the first outcomes. We are creating motion through our commitments, but there is still much work to do. First of all, there are quite a lot of donors out there that we would like to get on board this declaration. So, if you are sitting in this room or online as a representative of a donor that hasn't yet signed the declaration, please consider coming and joining us this time next year, if not before. Multiple donors have made changes to their humanitarian aid strategies as a result of their climate commitment, and this we find encouraging. It's not, however, only about the humanitarian funding, but also, of course, what is coming through on development and the climate financing sides. And we hope that governments act as whole of government and bring all of these instruments together to support the humanitarian needs that are arising with climate. Most of the signatories of the donor declaration have integrated climate action specifically into their institutional framework, so they're making a commitment at government levels, and in particular in disaster risk reduction and through climate change adaptation strategies. We're also seeing, and I think we have plenty of time to talk about that over the next 2 days, an increasing attention to acting early or to anticipatory action, particularly in the case of recurrent climate disasters. Now, the localization of aid is a strong commitment for many of us, and building capacity at the local level and in local communities to face climate adaptation and climate disasters is key. The environmental impact of humanitarian aid itself is under scrutiny. So, as you may know, ECHO, for one, has put in place some minimum environmental requirements, and many of the donor signatories are developing greening of their own aid approaches. So much for the first baby steps and the commitment and the motion. I hope that next year I can come back with even more. Where can we improve our collective efforts? Firstly, on creating ways to measure and collect the evidence around the impact of our projects and programs while they're taking into account climate. And secondly, in helping organizations, partners, local organizations, institute their own change so that their own methods of working in capacity are strengthened by ready for the climate challenge. So, we cannot tackle this issue alone, that is clear. We must all rally round. I have a few seconds to tell you about a resource that DG ECHO has put in place to help that organizational change and system change. We have mapped the expertise available to the humanitarian community, to us, to you, to implement those commitments in the Climate Charter, climate resilience and the greening of humanitarian aid. Wonderful work with Group URD and Adapt Initiative. Thank you to everybody who's been involved. We've listed 20 different kinds of support from academia, networks, communities of practice, consultancy, tools, support desks, funding initiatives. So a whole range of available support to adapting to the climate challenge. And now I think the issue is how we bring that together and share that collectively. People and organizations want to know how to react to these challenges themselves. They don't want somebody else coming in to tell them how to do it. So we're all going through this process of setting our organizations up differently for the climate challenge. And that is one of the challenges. Because while we can see there's a lot of expertise and collective information out there, we hope that we can provide a kind of roster and support and bridge a potential capacity gap. But at the same time, we're all going through this process. So the resources we can each spare to support others are relatively limited. So part of the challenge, I think, is to bring that together and to make sure that we can maximize the change in the system. So for this reason, I'm stopping there with a little bit of a tantalizer on what we have potentially available, but still much work to do. And I know that we have, Fanny, a couple of days where we can have discussions both in the room and outside about how we make this momentum move further. And again, I really hope that we'll get also some more donors joining us in the next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julia. We do, thank you. We hope the family will grow, and we hope the baby steps will come to teenager without going through the crisis, hopefully. So now I will turn to Fia and to start the panel discussion. So Fia from Dan Church Aid, we wanted to have your views on, as a signatory to the Climate and Environment Charter, could you give us your reflections on the role that the Charter has played in integrating climate and environment action in the humanitarian sector first, as a whole?
Thank you, Fanny. Thank you for your question. First of all, there's 2 points in terms of what the role the Charter has played. One thing is it sets it's a unique entry point for setting the bar high and for pushing humanitarians to really walk the climate talk, raise our ambitions and do no harm to the environment, as well, and most importantly, to really work with local communities on addressing their solutions for the problems they're faced by. Another thing is also it's a really meaningful entry point for collaboration and learning and sharing. And I want to make an example from Denmark, where Care Denmark, DCA, Danish Refugee Council, Danish Red Cross, and WWF Denmark have worked towards developing climate mainstreaming tools to also reduce our own carbon emission as NGOs. And I really think that's a strong example of how working together can really push our internal organizational footprint. On how we have changed in Dan Church Aid over the last years, we are probably the most recent signatory to the Charter, but nonetheless, I think perhaps one of the organizations that are fast-tracking on this issue. Since 2017, we have tracked our progress in terms of how we are mainstreaming climate actions into our overall global humanitarian development portfolio. And currently, we stand at 30% of our total projects have a climate action. And are we satisfied with that? No, of course not. So by 2026, we've set a target that we want 50% of all our projects across the triple nexus to have a climate footprint. Another thing is also a whole of organization approach to climate. So on top of a global strategy, which is very much on climate ambitions, we have an internal climate policy, which refers to our carbon emissions. And that's really crucial as well, because we need that dialogue internally. We need to talk to our procurement, to our country offices on how to walk this talk together. A third point is localization, and I'm so happy, Julia, you mentioned this. And I'm also happy to hear some of our keynote speakers this morning mentioning localization, because without local actors, we would not be able to make any sustainable impact whatsoever. We've signed the locally led adaptation principles. We've signed the Grand Bargain, and we are a very proud member of the Charter for Change, where we are committed to transfer 25% of our humanitarian portfolio directly to local actors. This is going to change things for a much more impactful way of working on climate. So I think we can learn from these other processes on doing especially direct finance to local actors. A fourth thing I would like to highlight is working climate smart in an integrated and multi-sectoral approach. So when we support financial inclusion and access to local markets, we need to incorporate a greening element. We need to incorporate greening and climate smart solutions in the dialogue with local authorities. That's the way forward, really trying to merge and build a nexus between our different activities. So that was my 4 points on what we are doing. And maybe I would like to say a lot of what we're doing with local actors is really also agroecological impact it's about biodiversity, it's about cash for disaster risk reduction. It's a lot of these activities that are integrated into each other. So whether it's adaptation, whether it's mitigation, whether it's loss and damage, it doesn't make sense, it's not the big thing. How we integrate it together with our humanitarian activities. And maybe just one last thing, Fanny, is the gendered impact. And I did notice that in the donor declaration, there's no mentioning of women as champions in this. And I do think we need to push much stronger on emphasizing the role of women in disasters and the impact that women face. In the Nordic countries, we did a study some years ago, and we are praising ourselves for being quite on the front run in terms of gender equality. But I'll tell you, in our climate finance to developing countries, the gender programming is not strong whatsoever. So I really think we, as governments and as me as an NGO, we really have to emphasize a lot more on the gendered impact of the disasters and climate, and improve that in our programming.
Thank you so much, Fia. Lots of really interesting points to unpack about the importance to walk the talk ourselves and reach higher targets, as you mentioned, going from 30 to 50 in your case, but also localization. And I'm sure we'll have an interesting point of view from Azmat in terms of how do you feel that local organizations are they effectively engaged in the process, not just programming, but also decision making? So, and of course, thank you very much for the gender point and the missing part in the donor declaration. So maybe actually now I'll turn to Ignacio. do not worry, Azmat. It will be a bit later. Ignacio. I wanted to ask you now, so we've heard from the Commission, we've heard from France about the ambitions behind the declaration and the first steps that have been implemented, but what challenges do you see from ICVA's perspective that humanitarian organizations that have signed the Environment Charter, what are the challenges that they face in implementing it? What is needed in particular from donors to actually accelerate, because climate change is coming fast, and so we need to accelerate. So what are the more than incremental steps, but what is the accelerator that we need?
Yeah, thanks. And 6 points. But before that, I really encourage everybody to buy some running shoes. This is not about baby steps. This is about a sprint. This is running now and really fast. JEC report coming out today. As you said, we already know the content of it. It means we have to move fast and we have to have the agility and change our organizations really fast. The launch of the Charter on Climate and Environment was a bit less than 2 years ago. A huge effort by IFRC, ICRC, who are far ahead of the curve. Same as other organizations. We've heard from DCA as well. And in the last almost 2 years, there's been a strong mobilization. You mentioned 345 signatories to the Charter and support from 11 donors. I'd like to come back to that in a moment. But first, as you said, Stéphane Romate, it's about a package. The donor declaration and the charter are a package. They go together. They have been worked also in connecting different pieces of that. And the donor declaration signed by the EU and by 24 other donors, as you mentioned, still have to trace Greece, Portugal, Latvia, and Slovakia. I mean, perhaps you couldn't name them. I can do it. But what's important also is if we go back then to something which is a package, and we look at the charter, where there we have 11 supporters as donors, of which at the moment of the European Humanitarian Forum last year, there were only 3, and none of them were from the EU. since then. A number have joined, and we really appreciate, and also different discussions that we're having with them. I think it's really great because Asma is going to cover, I hope, I imagine, because he's a great speaker and I already heard him on several occasions, on how the multiple crises compound in one situation. And at the same time, and we've heard from the opening session, how many of the ministers referred to the siloed financing systems between humanitarian development, peace, and climate. That the communities don't work in that siloed manner. Eh? So how do we manage all this and best serve the different communities? I would like to then come to my 6 points in three minutes. One is to, and coming from the IGVA conference that took place on Friday in Geneva, is that question of breaking the silos and scaling up and mainstreaming climate action, climate adaptation through the programs. And there were good examples that you gave, Fee, of how an organization can set its targets and moving towards that. The second point is, and it was also a concluding point from the IGVA annual conference that we had on Friday, is to revisit the target balance of assistance for humanitarian development, peace, and climate needs to be really to have the appropriate prioritization of resources. And that is exactly what comes out from a report that I really encourage you to read, that came out on Friday from CEDA, which is leaving no crisis behind with assistance for the Nexus. The third point is one that I'm not going to elaborate on. It is a key element in, for instance, the Grand Bargain commitments is around the quality funding and how this can strengthen the resilience and the preparedness. The fourth point is on really important on harmonizing the requirements that all the donors are going to start coming up with. And Stéphane, you also mentioned the requirements for the French grants to NGOs. Now, this is the opportunity to get this right. Eh? Let's not forget that we have to aim for less paper and more aid, rather than more requirements and without harmonization, which then also takes so much energy from all of us. This is the opportunity not to miss this. So this is a strong request to donors, so we say, to get the act together on what requirements are going to be requested. The fifth point is really to follow up on the findings of the eco mapping, which you mentioned, and I'm not going to go further in the explanations. I thought it was really well covered, and exactly, really a good document to have. It does show where we have the resources in the sector. It also establishes where we need to reinforce, and one of them is specifically the recommendation to a support to the Climate and Environment Charter, and it's named as a support, and the creation of a secretariat, and we are in discussion with a number of donors. But this is not for tomorrow, this is for today. The request from the surveys, also including to national organizations, is that to change organizations, there is a need also for some additional support and for the resources that exist to be best used. Now, we're not talking about skyrocketing budgets here. I mean, if you have 5 donors putting 100,000 euros a year for 3 years, you have that machine there. So if it's 10 donors, it's 50,000. But it's not for tomorrow, it's today, which is needed. Again, sorry, this sense of urgency. Some people say that I always sit on the edge of my chair, and that's because I'm all the time in a sense of things have to go faster than they are indeed going. And then just to finish, I know my time is over, finish with an anecdote, which I think is a testimony of how national leaders of national organizations are sending here to Brussels a clear message in terms of environmental issue, but also of how to use resources. So 30 leaders of national NGOs that attended the conference IGVA on Friday in Geneva and the whole week. They took a bus and came from Geneva to Brussels rather than 30 air tickets. I think this is a testimony of how also national leaders are aware of this. They have to come to Europe by air, but then from there they have made the effort. Asmat was amongst them, and really want to thank you.
Thank you very much, Ignacio, for this really strong advocacy push. We heard you about the running shoes, and yours are particularly flashy and gives a lot of energy. But really interesting what you said about the package of these two sets of commitments coming together and the need for donors to really like the more aid, less paper, because we know compliance, of course, is important, but it shouldn't come at the expense of a real aid being delivered to those who need it the most. And on that, I'm coming to you, Asmat. Asmat, we would like, it's a huge responsibility on your shoulder. You're representing local CSOs. If you could tell us from your perspective, we know that donors, we know that INGOs have signed, commitments linked to the Grand Bargain on localization, supporting local actors, but also building the capacities of local authorities. What do you see as your biggest challenges in implementing the climate and environmental charter?
Okay, thank you so much, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In the morning, we listened, like a few words struck me, and one was that we use this word solidarity and pledges and commitments, but as long as they are just words and they don't translate to the real actions, they are empty words. When we look at the very language of the charter and inside the commitment, one, we do see a lot about working with the local capacities and working with the local actors. Same goes for the commitments of Grand Bargain and Charter for Change, but what happens on ground is sort of really different from what is written in those documents and what has been sort of agreed to in the headquarters. You would definitely agree that climate change, specifically when it comes to adaptation, is very localized phenomenon. Like climate change is not creating similar impacts across the world, even inside a specific country. The impacts of the climate change are different for different regions, for different people, and for different communities. And that's why whenever we have to go for a climate change adaptation or disaster risk reduction in such a manner where we build the resilience of the communities, the action need to be very localized. And for a localized action, you do need resources. The local communities who do face the music of the climate change on daily basis, they do know what is the solution to those problems. But unfortunately, they don't have the resources. Someone asked me in Geneva the previous week that, how are you going as a country or as a humanitarian community? And I said, we were just recovering from the COVID and we thought we will all be okay. And then this regime change in Afghanistan happened and we had to receive additional refugees. And we thought that once it is over, we are going to be quite good. And this flood hit us then. Now many of you who might be in this room or who might have partners or who might be sort of following the situation in Pakistan, flood is not just sort of a very new phenomenon for us. We do face the riverine flood every year, and for this 2022, we had all the preparedness. We had even drills and exercises, but it hit us from the area which we never expected. So this is climate change. Like in part of Balochistan, where we hardly get any rain and we were hit by flash floods from that area. So climate change is not just a word for us, but it is a reality which we see every day. And then at the local level, we do have quite good practices, like very low cost solutions, like the nature-based solution for climate change adaptation and the nature-based solutions for disaster risk reductions, and they can pay a lot. They can result in reducing the impact, but still, whether it is low cost or high cost, but if you don't have resources, I don't know how to translate it, but we say in English that even if a camel costs just 1 penny, and if you don't have that penny, you cannot have the camel. So the nature-based solutions might be low cost, but the local actors and the local communities, even if they don't have those low resources available to them, they cannot make the change. Now, coming to the system, like Ignacio said that it is urgent, like the climate change and the sense of urgency is there. We do know that when a baby learns how to walk, the steps might be shaky and sometimes not very big, but at least the sense of urgency of the climate change requires the direction of those steps to be in the right direction. And that direction would be localizing the action. Like this is like cascading this political will to the country operations, and sort of whether you might have some legal requirements where you cannot fund the local actors directly, but still you can direct your those partners whom you can fund to go for a locally led response where the humanitarian action and the early recovery action build the foundation where the climate change adaptation and long-term development in a sustainable manner can happen. And I'm just giving up a few of my last seconds so that we can have more questions. And
really?
Yes.
Are you sure you don't want to say more about challenges you face now? Or
well, the challenges is because the challenges are so many that if I start with them, I will just end up with.
Okay, top 2.
Yes, there are like. In addition to challenges, let me sort of acknowledge some good things from the donors. Like among the donors, Germany have been funding some START network and Ready Pakistan actions, and they had been like helpful in this climate change adaptation. But the needs are so immense. Then in this flood response 2022, we asked for activation of the country-based pool fund. In Pakistan, we do have quite a good achievement in terms of localization, like the country-based pool funds previously, they like around more than 80% went to the local actors. We tried and we advocated with the UN system to sort of activate the country-based pool system, but we don't know why it didn't. There are sort of, whenever it comes to realizing the localization commitments and the localization steps, we do find that the overall ecosystem or the overall system is not friendly to the local actors. There always are quite valuable excuses to exclude them. Whatever system supports the local actors or the local system, there always are some problems within the system, and that they couldn't be activated.
Thank you. And sorry for pushing you a bit. Now we'll take a little step on the side, and I'm going to turn to somebody who's not on the stage, Bruno. And I'm going to give this mic to you. Bruno Joachim is the Executive Director of the Climate Action Accelerator, and he wanted to make an intervention about an initiative that the CAA has been working on.
Yeah, thank you. So in 2 words, the Climate Action Accelerator is a non-for-profit initiative which tries to find humbly some of the answers to many of the questions that were exposed in this panel, and especially 2, which is how to operationalize practically at the level of organizations and how to scale up. And we've been experimenting over the last 2 years with around 20 partner organizations, both some large ones like ICRC, like MSF, but also the first national actors from sub-Saharan Africa, which are joining this year. We're trying to find very practical approaches on these questions. And on the how to operationalize, I think what are the challenges? I think many organizations are facing how to upgrade that infrastructure on the field, whether it's buildings, whether it's energy systems, whether it's the way they construct or rehabilitate. How do you make sure in your supply chain the goods and services you consume are actually directed towards production efforts which take into account the climate crisis. It's how to get travel under control. It's how to manage waste responsibly. So on all these very practical challenges, it's important, and it's a bit the findings of this experience, it's important to have a principled approach. So first, what the IPCC is asking for, and they'll confirm it this afternoon, it's not just improving. We are in a crisis situation. It's actually reducing by 50% over the next decade for every stakeholder in society, their emissions. And the question is how to do this while protecting the social goals of the valuable humanitarian organizations around the table, whether in developing countries or from richer societies. It means having a quantified approach with targets. Without targets, it's very hard to monitor. It means also, and it's been said, integrated approaches where you don't oppose mitigation, resilience, adaptation. A very large part of the solutions actually serve a common objective, and basically mitigation actions also support autonomy, resilience, adaptation for services to populations. Now, how to scale up? What we'd like to share is that we are developing the project of what could be a generic approach at the level of the 8th sector and organizations, trying to capitalize on the different experiences we have and others. And we hope to be able to publish what it could look like, basically, towards the end of the year. So a kind of playbook for organization and a sectoral analysis. And we believe it will be the opportunity also to look at enablers at policy level, including maybe some adaptations that donors need to do to actually create a facilitating environment for organizations to accelerate their own transformation. There's a big issue about how, because there are both saving investments and running costs, there's a big issue of how organizations can actually keep some of the savings to actually reinvest them where it needs to be, but that we need to find answers to.
Thank you, Bruno.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're looking forward to have this new resource by the end of the year. So now, enough with the listening. Now it's time for you to be part of this. So a question will come up on Slido with multiple choices. So here, based on your experience, based on what you heard this morning, we're going to ask you to respond to this question. In your opinion, what are the main levers that would support humanitarian organizations in meeting their climate charter commitments? And so you have different options there. So that's the first task. And then the second task is to, while you're on Slido, continue. I see that some really good questions have already come up. But it's the moment to keep, wow, that's, okay. So it's the moment to keep adding more so that we can have a wide set of questions to vote from. Okay. Well, I don't want to comment to influence your voting. Well, that's very interesting to see that really capacity building of local partners and local authorities is coming up first. I don't know, Amra, do you want to comment on that one? Are you surprised?
Well,
Or do you want to say we don't need
to respect
capacity
the
building?
understanding of the people who have voted, so I'm standing. Thank you so much for putting it that way. And yes, this is like the climate change adaptation. It has to go the right way. It needs to be the locally led. I sort of a bit disagree with some jargons and terminologies when it comes to the capacity building. So it generally carries this notion of a colonization or colonialism, that the local actors there do not have the capacity, and the rich people or people from the global north need to go there and build their capacity. So I am standing just because I'm happy that you people voted for this thing, and I am taking it very positive that the climate change adaptation is necessarily a local process which will take place necessarily. But for the future, like for the next year, if it is going to be sort of voting, so instead of the word capacity building of the local actors and local authorities, I would advocate for some better version of this word, because the local actors, the local people, the local communities who do face this issue of the climate change on their daily basis, they are not short of capacities. They are just short of resources. But if you put the resources and finances in the capacity, then it's okay. But in terms of knowledge and having solutions for the problems, the local people do have solutions. It is just like they are short of the problems. Thank you. Thank you for your voting.
I saw a lot of nodding when you were speaking, and I think, yeah, this term is problematic. And as you said, climate impacts are very localized, and traditional indigenous knowledge, experience has to be enhanced. When we talk about meaningful participation in decision making, in planning, and implementing, and monitoring, we have to make it happen, not just tokenistic approach. And it's also interesting to have this, the support, operational and technical support adapted to the ed sector. And I think today we heard about really good initiatives. So the mapping exercise, what CAA is working on to really accompany the whole sector in this transition. And to me, it's actually interesting to see that investment funding only come third. Because usually that is the first thing that comes to mind, but it looks like it's funding. Of course, we need more funding. We always need more funding, but it's more about how to better target, use that funding through local actors for technical supports. So, yeah. Thank you very much for that. So I hope you did your homework as well on the questions. And so now we'll turn to Suzanne. So Suzanne from the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We heard your minister earlier on talking about how you've been working on scaling up anticipatory action, on having this target of 5% of humanitarian funding going to anticipatory action. For you, we heard from France earlier about what they're thinking to do in terms of their commitments from the donor declaration. What is Germany planning up next? Because we're all looking at you, so we hope you have a plan.
So thank you, Fanny, and thank you for inviting me to this very interesting panel. So first, on anticipatory action. So I guess for many of you present here today, it is evident that we have to act in a more anticipatory manner in humanitarian action. And there are so many ample examples, and we have the data to really act before a crisis hits, be it a flooding, a storm, or whatever. So, I always quote this example because I really, really like it. Because if we do so, it's not more dignified, which is clear, but it's also more cost effective. And the FAO had an example that they spent 230 million on preventing a locust plague on the Horn. So 230 million, this seems to be a lot. But they said if they hadn't prevented it, they would have had to spend 1.7 billion. And I think this is so clear to everybody, should be. So we, as Germany, we're really lobbying, not only with NGOs and international organizations to follow us, but also with other donor countries. And I have to say I'm a little bit proud that we managed during our G7 presidency to bring all G7 foreign ministers to commit to scale up anticipatory action. And as you said, Fanny, we have committed ourselves as Germany to spend at least 5% of our overall budget. And to give it a number, so 2020 we spent around 30 million. And now we're planning to spend way up more than 100 million on anticipatory action. But we also fund pilot projects all over the world, and I will not use the term capacity building, but we have a project that's called Together, which shows the spirit of this capacity building, and helping as well with risk analysis. So we work, for example, in Lebanon, together with the Red Cross and the Lebanon Red Crescent, to help risk analysis in schools and in regions where there is the risk of possible crisis. And we have many partners at our side. You mentioned the START network, but of course there is SURF and DREF and WFP and FAO and so many others, to just name a few. So this is the one thing. But I wanted, of course, to say something on the greening part as well. Because as Bruno said it, it is not a question if humanitarian action should become greener, it is just a how. And there's one important thing. While not hampering international organizations to deliver and to people in need. And but we think that it's very good what you are doing, and we're planning to supporting you in this goal to reduce carbon emissions by 50% by 2030. And this will hopefully also help international organizations to lower a little bit their own burden and not be more expensive, but cost efficient. So we try to be greener in humanitarian assistance. For example, we have projects in the Sahel where we help fund refugee camps with solar panels. And we have a new project, this is a desalination project. But I have to tell you, it is not that easy. There are a lot of obstacles, not only technical obstacles, but there are also political obstacles, as you can assume. This is a little bit a way to go, but we lobby as well in the German community to include in their projects parts that are greener and becoming as well environmentally friendly in their project proposals. So, and I guess some German NGOs have also joined the charter. That's very good. I guess the international spirit should be that we have to come to a standardization of requirements, and that it's not merely an add-on, but something that we have to do. So, and I have a little bit of time, so I want to touch on something that was said, and this is localization. This is really so important. And we try to follow up our commitments to be more local, but for a big donor like Germany, it is very difficult to directly fund local organizations. So we will try to work with our intermediaries, so the international organizations, to do more on this front, but it's very important. And another thing is, there is a really, really good thing, and everybody who is watching us as well online and don't know about it, it is called WFP Innovation Accelerator. And so we're financing this together with our Ministry of Cooperation, and they come up in a regular way with pitches, and so that young people from all over the world, they pitch ideas how they can become greener, how not to use coal, not to use wood. And there are so many good examples out there, but they have to be scaled up. So funding is needed. It's not the ideas that are lacking, but they're out there. So for those of you who don't know it yet, please look it up. They have a website, a very good website, and I encourage you to maybe, if you have funding, scale up some of the good ideas.
Thank you very much, Susanna. Lots of, it was really important actually you spent a bit more time on the greening, which I think we didn't mention that much in the previous conversation. We don't have time, but I would be really interested to learn more about the political obstacles regarding installing solar panels in refugee camp. But thank you again also for highlighting solutions, things that are at hand and that we need to make better use of. So now before introduce the last but not least speaker, I will ask all of you to look at Slido and pick, I don't know if you can pick more than one, but your favorite questions, because we will start the Q&A session right afterwards. So please do so now. And now we'll ask Peter to talk about the work that Czechia has done, especially during its presidency of the EU, which ended in December, in particular on disaster risk reduction. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. First, thank you for inviting me to this panel. We, as the presidency in the EU that ended in December, as you all know, because many of you in this room have been with us as members of the working parties, COHAFA and CODEF. It was our honor to preside and to bring to the table issues that are actually being discussed here, more particularly the DRR, which from one point of view is the smart way of doing things, and from the other part is what Czechs know quite well, because all kinds of disasters, mainly floods, we've been through, and we have learned our own lessons. So we are trying to bringing to the table, and you know that we were able to, with your help, to pass council conclusions on DRR. Many of you participated in the debate that took place in Prague with Madame Mezzotori, the UN DRR chair, and the presentations we made about our own programs, mainly in Cambodia, where it is our priority country, where we are together with our NGO, People in Need, installing early warning systems against the flash floods. So, and we are trying to keep this theme alive. So even ahead of this forum, we organized a warm-up session in Geneva just about 10 days ago about early warning systems and about a new technology that is available now, artificial intelligence and all these new things that may be utilized for better preparing the least developed and fragile countries for, unfortunately, inevitable climate disasters. When it comes to the donor declaration and its emphasis on minimizing the carbon footprint in humanitarian action, I think the best way to do is to curb the amount of humanitarian action whatsoever, because this is in fact the way we are all concerned. Because when it comes to the real humanitarian action, in my opinion, there is always in the first place the humanitarian action itself, and less emphasis may be taken on the climate effect. That's just the nature of humanitarian action. While where we can be better is, as we were discussing, localization, and we never talk about cash transfer programs, which is in fact the ultimate localization, which should be also considered more and maybe evaluated as a means of limiting the carbon footprint of humanitarian action and supporting local markets and local products in humanitarian action. Last word about the nexus. We also formalized together with the Commission, the Nexus guidelines, and also organized a delegate trip to Sudan, as some of you may remember. I think it was a success that we came to Khartoum, divided to two groups. One went to Port Sudan and the other to South Darfur, where we saw the unfortunate result of the development element missing. Because as we all know, as the result of the situation in Sudan, development programs have been mainly halted, which has the obvious effect on humanitarian needs. People stay in IDP camps, they do not return to their places because basically conditions are not created for their return because of the lack of development action. And this is we actually came there to study the nexus, and as a result of what has been happening in this country, we actually saw the lack of the nexus, the necessity of re-establishing the nexus, and to try at least in this interim situation re-establish some of the development and stabilization efforts, which will indeed lead to the at least curbing of humanitarian needs in this country. The same applies to Ethiopia, where the MIP has also been halted because of the situation, and it is desperately needed to be re-established, in particular in sustainable agriculture sector and in youth, and I would say empowering of the youth and making them more engaged in their own future in sustainable sectors like sustainable agriculture. So again, I think that a lot has to be done, and thank you for this panel that addresses all these difficult issues.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for raising the need again to break the different silos to make sure that we tackle this, not just from a humanitarian angle, but really working together. And the example from Sudan and Ethiopia were very telling, I think. So we are quite late. I'm not gonna, but you probably have seen that. So we're gonna go to the Q&A phase, and I'm hoping the support team has selected. So just to make sure the questions on the screen are the top questions. Can I get a nod from someone? Yes. All right, so let's go. So the first one is, how do you reconcile the cost associated with greening humanitarian aid, such as eco minimum standards, with the requirement to keep costs per beneficiary low? Who could I ask this question to? Julia?
Thank you very much. Actually, I've taken extensive notes. It was a really interesting discussion, and we won't have time to do them all. So I'm just going to bullet point. But on the issue of costs and the cost of going greener, let me put it in shorthand, this was a real key discussion for us in ECHO when we came out with our minimal environmental requirements. And the short version of this is that we know that there will need to be some upfront investments that may cost more. And we are prepared to look at those. However, what we want to avoid, of course, is some kind of greenwashing of all costs. So the good news is that yes, while we're this year looking at our project selection, we will be looking very clearly at how those projects apply the minimum environmental requirements, and we will take those costs into account in the short term. The bad news is, of course, we're all facing increasingly tight budgets, and so everything we invest on our efforts here is part of the broader issue of how we can meet the ever-increasing needs. But as Peter so well put it, I mean, we have to make that investment now. I'll stick to that, although I'm very tempted to dive into all of the other questions that are there. But over to you, Fanny.
Yeah, I don't want the heat to go on echo. So the second question is about what is donors' appetite to innovation within the supply chain for limiting its environmental impact while ensuring timely and qualitative response. So I don't know if Stéphane or Susanne, you or Peter, do you want to? What's your appetite on that?
No, just one. I think there are, many innovations in the supply chain, which are potential and which have to be exploited. For France, in the crisis center, we have put in place an innovation fund to allow NGOs to present us this kind of innovative approach in terms of supplying aid on the ground. And for example, pooling a network of supply chain organization, this kind of logistical issues. So yes, innovation is part of the process. And the more you are innovating, the more you're pooling, the more you are also lowering the impact on the environment. So I think this is a kind of, virtue circle. And so this is why I think this question is very much important. And yes, we have to dedicate resources to help NGOs also to present innovative projects in that domain of supply chain. This is our testimony, but certainly Suzanne has other additions to make.
Yeah, I think it's exactly along the line what Julia and Stefan said. Yes, it will be a little bit, at the beginning, maybe a little bit more expensive, but in the long run, it will be less expensive. And so we're looking at ways how we can support that. And for example, solar panels, yes, it's an investment, but in the long run, it's much better. And sometimes it's also better to build a water pipe and just not bringing water trucks in all the time. But this is again then a question of the nexus. So we are trying to do that. And but it should, you used the term greenwashing. I really liked it. It should not be like, everything will be more expensive, and then you can make a little dot, yes, check the box, but it should really be something that is it's a change, and it's also a paradigm shift and a shift in mind what we need.
Thank you. Then we have a question about how will ECO, MOFAs and INGOs incorporate procurement beyond the strategy into practice? Procurement is 2/3 of our humanitarian budgets and the key enabler for the declaration. So very concrete, practical questions today. I don't know, Ignacio, do you want to? Because I see that also INGOs are...
I don't mind.
Or, okay. Yeah.
Well, in DCA, we developed a procurement guideline for greening our ambitions with the country offices. If we don't have our country offices walking this talk, forget about it. We're not going to change anything in our operation. So having clear guidelines to how country officers can engage and can have applying a more greener approach, as well as engage in dialogue with partners, suppliers on ground. I think that's the first step that needs to be taken. Ignacio, do you want to add anything?
Just perhaps rapidly to certainly not go away with that 2/3 of our humanitarian budgets are logistics. I think it's good to disaggregate that, see what is on food, and perhaps there are some that are on cash. But having said this, I mean, for me, this question brings to the much broader picture of the different silos in the different ways we work and the funding, and the good example that you took of 230 million put for low-cost situation, avoiding humanitarian crisis with 1.4 billion, or more or less those figures, no, Susanne?
Thank you. Julia?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to sound repetitive, but when we look again at our minimum environmental requirements, it's quite right. Of course, the questioners who put this photo this up here, our supply chain and our logistics are really something that we have to try and get greener. That comes to our business model, if I can call it that. So back to the points from Azmat about how we respond and where we respond, where we stockpile, how we supply those stockpiles, how we use local markets. So I think there's really a lot to unpack there. I note it for another session for another year. And of course, it's very easy for me to say this will be through our partnership approach, but actually in our own logistics guidelines and our own direct assistance through the EHR, European Humanitarian Response Capacities, we're also looking at the same standards. So it's about consistency. I heard the call for harmonization. Clearly, we need to all push in the same direction there. And of course, the partnership collaboration, the dialogue that we were discussing at the beginning. And lastly, just in case it's the last time I get to this point about the local response, as we're sometimes calling it, just to say that, as Susanna said, we have to reconcile our accountability in different ways as donors. And that includes, of course, the accountability that keeps the constraints on some of the ways we fund. But what we indeed are trying to work on here in ECHO, and we have just published our localization guidelines on promoting equal partnerships. And I fully take the point about capacity building. I think all of us, as I tried to say in my intervention, have to work on our organizational development and enhancing our capacities. So that, I think, is a very key part of this whole supply chain discussion. Thanks.
Thank you. So maybe, Julia, what you were, because that's just a personal remark, but in the opening ceremony of the EHF, would have been good to have a local CSO representative speak, actually. In addition, of course, to a better gender balance, because, diversity as well was a big miss. So maybe for next year. And maybe a last easy question, I would say, that came from the floor is it possible to imagine a website where donors can share the tools developed to operationalize the principles of the declaration? So there is the progress report that is on the page of the declaration already. But what about having links, for example, to the future French strategy, for example, or Ignacio, you wanted to say something? No?
I would take this on the package, so not only on the declaration. It's around the charter and the declaration. And already quite a lot of work has been done. There's a compendium. There's quite a lot which can scale up with a secretariat for the charter. That would enable all this that is prepared, that exists, to scale up. So that was my last my last pledge, well, my advocacy point on that one.
Okay. Julia, do you think that would be possible to have the reference to some of the...
A single website, I think, probably isn't the answer. I think Ignacio is pointing towards where we need to go, which is to build up a collective space that we can all plug into. In the meantime, you can find a lot, of course, in the places you would normally look for this information, but the point, I think, is well taken.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We're getting to a close, and I think I would be way too ambitious to say that I'm going to summarize what happened over the past hour and a half here. Thank you for your patience, for staying 15 minutes long, but I think the climate emergency deserves 15 minutes more. So I think the main takeaways for me today, it's really this unity that I sense from the panelists, from the room, from speakers that we heard in the opening ceremony, and really tackling together the climate emergency. And I say emergency, I hate the word crisis. Like, you know, there's no way back. It is happening, sorry for being a bit pessimistic, but this is happening fast. And I really like the running shoes, the running shoes from Ignacio. I think if there's one image that you should leave this room with, it's that one, is put on this orange, yellow, pink, whatever running shoes you want, and let's go for it. I'm not going to say let's rush and do stupid things, but there are many solutions that are either documented, that people are working on, brainstorming on what works, what doesn't, what we should scale up, and what should not, I mean, what may be not something to explore further. And the other things that I really heard today is we need to work together. So I loved what you mentioned about Danish NGOs coming together to come up with guidance. The need to really work with local CSOs, not treat them as just, entities to which we give funding, but really as key actors in terms of their knowledge, their knowledge of the communities, their knowledge of the climate impacts, and they need to be seen as not just entities that need capacity building, but really to be at the heart of our efforts. The importance of dialogue with NGOs, of course, at national levels, and wink to the French government. The importance of really also taking into account the gender impacts of climate change, of humanitarian crisis, and the role of women and most vulnerable communities in the response to those crises. The need to harmonize donors' requirements. We do not need to have guidelines from ECHO, from Germany, from the French, etc. We need to have a set that we can all work with and do not spend our entire lives filling out forms and reports. The importance of breaking silos, of increasing funding for anticipatory action, but also the upfront investment for greening humanitarian response. We heard you, and we'll follow up on that. And finally, I think, I'm sorry, it would be probably good because I couldn't list all of them, but there are many resources that were mentioned today, from the study on the mapping exercise to help humanitarian partners, DWFP, acceleration, Action Accelerator, what Bruno mentioned that should come out at the end of this year. So there are many things out there that we could get inspired from. So I hope you'll learn a lot from this session. I hope you didn't get bored, that you have ideas to how to take this forward. And if there is one last word that I would say to you is, remember, climate inaction is just not an option anymore. Thank you.